Hi, everyone. I'm Noor Anand Chawla, an independent journalist, writer, blogger, and lawyer. I write on a variety of subjects for a large number of newspapers, magazines, and digital publications. And it is my absolute pleasure to be your host today for this wonderful series on the 75 Days of Partition with the 1947 Partition Archive. And today we have a very interesting subject, as you can see flashed on the screen, on the making of Project Dastaan. Now, this is day 53 of hosting esteemed guests for this series, which will continue till August 17th. And today, of course, as I've already mentioned, I will be speaking to the team behind Project Dastaan. That's Sparsh Ahuja, Sam Dalrymple, and Saadia Gardezi. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with this pioneer project, which I'm sure many of you are not, let me tell you a little bit about them before we begin our conversation. So Sparsh Ahuja is a documentary filmmaker and the founder of Project Dastaan. He's a 2020 National Geographic Explorer, the youngest ever recipient of the Catchlight Fellowship, a 2020 Webby nominee, and has been shortlisted for the Alexia Foundation Student Grant and Lucy Emerging Artist Scholarship. Sparsh graduated as a Fitz-Randolph Scholar in PPE at the University of Oxford. Let's welcome Sparsh. Sam Dalrymple, is the co-founder and operations lead of Project Dastaan. He graduated as a Sanskrit and Persian scholar from the University of Oxford. Sam has been published in the New York Times and Condé Nast Traveler and The Spectator, and worked with BBC Radio 4, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and the Turquoise Mountain. Sam is currently writing a book on the 5 partitions of India, a very interesting subject indeed, to be published by HarperCollins in 2023. And Saadia Gardezi, she makes the triumvirate of Project Dastaan, is another co-founder and the Pakistan lead of this project. She is a journalist and cartoonist and has worked as the op-ed editor for The Nation, one of Pakistan's leading daily newspapers. She graduated as an MPhil scholar in South Asian Studies from the Weidenfeld-Hoffman Leadership Program at Oxford University. Saadia is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Warwick. So welcome again to our audience and to our wonderful guests for this panel today. And let's begin. I have a set of questions for you guys. I hope you're all prepared to enlighten us on what you do through your wonderful project. So let's start. How did you develop an interest in the partition? Is the interest personal? And this I would like all three of you to answer. So you can take it as whoever would like to begin.
You want me to go?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we all met at university. We all were studying in the UK together. And all of us have personal attachments to the partition in different ways. And for me personally, both my grandfathers are migrants from West Punjab, and they both moved to Tilaknagar during the partition. I mean, personally growing up, I've heard a lot of stories of their journey, and they've always talked about this sense of longing and wanting to see their ancestral villages and their home villages again. I shared these stories with Sam and Saadia and another friend of ours, Amina, when we were all at Oxford together. And then we had this idea of why not create experiences to take these people back to their home villages. So yeah, I'll let Sam and Saadia.
Sam, would you like to go next?
Yeah. No. So I think the key thing was that we met in the UK, because in the subcontinent it's very hard to meet someone from the other side of the border. But the fact that the three of us were studying at Oxford together and we were having these conversations, and it quickly became evident, for example, that Sparsh's ancestral home was very easy for Saadia, for example, to go visit, and likewise everyone else. So my family has a kind of bit of a different connection. I'm from a kind of Anglo-Indian distantly family, and my family's been based in Delhi for 30 years. But it was only after actually joining Project Dastaan that I learned that my family did have its own partition history, which was that my granddad had never come out to visit my family in 30 years, and none of us really knew why. And he always kind of just got a bit uncomfortable whenever we brought up the idea of him coming out to visit. And it's because he was kind of brought out after World War II as a young kind of British officer, and a lot of his friends were killed on the trains between Delhi and Rawalpindi. And so he, despite being kind of a Brit, ended up traumatized, unable to come back to the subcontinent himself. And so I don't know, it definitely, I didn't go into this project knowing that I had a familial connection, but I think as a lot of British people inevitably do find out that they have these family links. But yeah, I'm based in Delhi. Sparsh got me involved very, very early on. And yeah.
That's fascinating. What about you, Saadia?
I agree with everything they've said. I am from Pakistan. I grew up in Lahore. So my personal interest is more as a Pakistani. My family actually didn't migrate. My family was settled in Punjab for decades, centuries. I kind of grew up with stories of partition. Being a Pakistani, 1947 is kind of the date when we became a nation state. So it is very integral to Pakistani identity. And my grandmother, for example, my nani was a volunteer worker in Lahore at the time, and she remembers, refugees coming into Lahore. Former Christian College in Lahore was turned into a refugee camp, and she remembers people being very sick because they had cholera. So these are just stories very often that you just grow up hearing from your grandparents. And so I was very interested in that connection between the past and the present, between the young and the old, and how we can kind of give back to that community, to that generation, and we do something really interesting for a younger generation by bringing in new technology.
I think that's really interesting, because all three of you bring three very important perspectives, three very important aspects of the actual partition, which took place, 75 years ago now. So coming to, the subject at hand, what exactly is Project Dastaan? And though you've sort of touched on why you felt the need for it, I'd love you to go, deeper into what was your vision for it, and perhaps why now? Why did you feel the need to start this project now?
So Project Dastaan, roughly, we have three different sides of what we do. So the first is what we call our social impact program. And that's where we interview survivors who have migrated during the partition, and they could be anywhere. So we've conducted interviews in 5 different countries in the regional languages. And we interview them about the places where they came from and if there's any place that they would like to see again. And then we'll have team members in each of the countries to go back, find these places, record them in virtual reality, and then show them back to the original witness. And a lot of these experiences we started off with either family members or friends of family members, and slowly as people started hearing about this, more and more people started messaging into us, asking us to make these experiences for them. So I think over the last 3 years, we've done around 20 or so. We've interviewed around 35 people, but we've connected around 20 people to their homes in this way. And with
and I think got five of those were particularly special because we actually managed to find old family friends or people who they remembered, not just locations, which I think cuts to the heart of what we were trying to do. It's not about just kind of showing a picture of a house, but actually trying to reconnect to one's childhood. And Sparsh's granddad, I mean, we can talk about this a bit later, but Sparsh's granddad is one person who we managed to put in touch with people he remembered from across the border.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
And then we have so because these stories were so touching, that after we'd done these interviews, we realized we didn't want them to just be left to just left to history. We wanted to create something out of them. And so we're now at the moment we've made 2 films, or no, one VR film, 1 film series. So I'll chat a little bit about the VR film, and then Sam and Saadia can jump in about the series. But Child of Empire is animated VR documentary about where you're put inside the shoes of one Indian witness and one Pakistani witness, and you experience their journey from the village to the train to the refugee camp. And so it's really meant to, as opposed to our experiences for the witnesses, who we try and create something really nostalgic and about schools and mosques and mandirs and houses. Like Child of Empire is meant to put you inside their journey, which is quite jarring, but it also like opens people up to how significant this event was, and really tries to immerse them in the experiences of those lived survivors.
I think the key with the other bits is in the social impact was wonderful, and we had a immense social media response, for example. But what we found quite difficult was, we might go out and trek off to some rural Pakistani village and film the well and the tree and the village hut that this family that's now living in Delhi remembers. But when you're trying to educate others who aren't the immediate family of that witness, it's often quite difficult to get people to care about that tree and that house and that hut and that well. Whereas what we're trying to do with both Child of Empire and Lost Migrations is give the same kind of level of experience and understanding to someone who doesn't necessarily have any connection to the partition whatsoever. More of a kind of raising awareness type thing. So in addition to the VR film, we also have 3 animated shorts that we've worked with a team of both Indian and Pakistani animators, which was very fun, cross-border collaboration, where we try to talk about some of the lesser known stories about partition. So kind of one focuses on the diaspora, one focuses on the experience of women, and one focuses on how kind of the bureaucracy of the states of India and Pakistan disrupted the lives of so many who hadn't necessarily chosen where they were going to be. And I think Saadia wrote some of the scripts, so she'll be able to give you a bit of more details on that.
Sure, I'd love to hear Saadia.
No, I think Sam, you got it. That was pretty. So that's called Lost Migration. That's kind of mine and Sam's thing that we've been doing for the last couple of years. It's a collaboration, again, to mention, between Puffball Studio in Pakistan and Spitting Image in India. And we wanted to have artists and visions and music from people in India and Pakistan. So that was a great experience. So me and Sam, we kind of wrote and conceptualized these 3 stories. They're kind of like a short story format. They're not a documentary style, but hopefully they touch to not only the message of the stories of partition, how traumatic they were, how different these experiences were, but they can also maybe speak to more recent experiences of migration, of global situations, of politics in India and Pakistan, politics around the state, etc. So we try to make them kind of more universal, because even though partition is kind of an experience that's specific to South Asia, it is still something that other people can identify with since decolonization and these new discussions about empire, how to think about empire, imperialism, decolonization, etc. So it's part of that, I think that big conversation.
And another really exciting thing that we're going to be releasing hopefully in the next few days is an interactive map and timeline of the partition as a website that anyone can access and see all of our stories and not only the interviews of the people we've recorded, but a state by state, touching on this point of how partition affected the subcontinent in very different ways, a state by state breakdown on how each region was individually affected, a timeline on the road to partition, and this whole map and resource will be available in English, Hindi, Urdu, and Bangla. So it's like an accessible education package.
That's amazing.
The idea is that isn't often when we hear about partition stories, they're very focused on Punjab and to a lesser extent kind of West Bengal and Bangladesh. When actually, even in South India, you go to Hyderabad and it was incredibly affected. You go to Kerala, you go to Northeast India and it's one of the most affected regions in the subcontinent. And Tripura is one of the only states that has had a complete demographic overhaul as a result of partition. Yet no one really talks about Tripura in the wider conversation of partition. So it's trying to touch upon some of those aspects that have come up.
This is great. This is on your website, but how does one access the films? I'm quite interested in those too.
So Child of Empire and Lost Migrations, we're going to be doing an 18-week tour through the UK, India, and Pakistan. So the first 2 screenings are at the V&A on next Friday, and then the BFI the week after that. Lost Migrations has sold out at the BFI, so it's going to be available later on. And Child of Empire, we will, after doing this tour, we'll release it online. Same with Lost Migrations. At some point, we're looking to, after we take it through the festivals and then do like kind of private screenings with museums and universities and schools, we'll make sure it's widely accessible. And of course, the education pack and all of our interviews are already available online. I mean, the new website will come out next week, but the interviews are already available on the website.
Okay, looking forward. Do keep me informed too, or maybe I'll go and sign up for your newsletter. Perhaps that's an easy way to do it.
For sure.
Okay, so moving on, obviously a project of this kind where you're from 3 different countries, you're going back in history, there's a lot of logistics involved. But what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've faced, and how have you overcome them, or in the duration of the project?
I think, I mean, to a large extent, I think we've all been surprised how nice the response has been and how excited everyone from all countries involved have been. As in, there's definitely been a few moments of kind of, stress, but by and large, as in, museums in all 3 countries have shown interest. As in, when we've gone to these villages, we've all been surprised by how excited everyone is about a project like ours that's happening. I think more than kind of, I don't know, people getting anxious about kind of India-Pakistan ties and that kind of thing, it's more been to do with when we've been tracking down some of these houses, for example. Or like tracking down someone's old haveli, someone's old masjid, someone's old mandir. Particularly in the rural villages, there's been so much development in the last 75 years that often they bear no resemblance to how they did 75 years ago. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges, actually finding something to show the witness. I know mostly it's been fine, and then in the big cities, even if we can't find the house, if they want to see Lucknow again, we can show them like the monuments of Lucknow. There's a lot of history that's still there, right? But when you go to some of these bins in rural Punjab, often, there is a dargah, but the dargah might have completely changed. Particularly the more rural they were and the more kind of kutcha their houses were, the harder it is to show anything more than like an old tree. I think that's been, Sparsh and Saadia, if there's anything you guys want to add to that.
No, I think it's been rewarding. I think at the start there was a lot, especially like when we were trying to raise the funding to do this project and then get it distributed afterwards. There was a lot of discussion in the UK about how is this relevant to us? Why should this be seen as British history? And I think it was a challenge at the start, but by and large, we've been able to answer that question quite convincingly, that this isn't just something that happened out in South Asia. It was part of the British Empire, and it should be seen as much British history and world history, given the scale of the event, than just something that happened in Punjab, which is like the kind of popular perception of.
Yeah, I think Britain often forgets that someone in Dhaka said this to me last week. Britain often forgets that it's also a post-colonial nation and that it was also part of the Raj. And I think families with kind of, Indian heritage and ties, as I was saying earlier, like mine, I think, I'm witness to that kind of thing. And I think that there's a huge ignorance in Britain towards its imperial history, towards its colonial history. And I think that's another thing that we're trying to change through our project and change through doing a UK tour, for example, is try to get people to realize that Britain's also a post-colonial nation. Britain's also part of the Raj. And it's not, and Britain was also part of, Imperial Punjab.
It's really interesting. We're going with Lost Migrations is going to the BFI next week, and I was on a Google search and reading into the history of the BFI, and it used to be a studio, and then they changed it to an art house under a commission called the Radcliffe Commission in 1948, and it was actually so Radcliffe would return from India and then reach BFI, and so all these histories are very connected.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So actually, this is interesting that you said that there's a lot of ignorance. I feel like there's a lot of ignorance even in India. I don't know about Pakistan. I'm not speaking for Pakistan, but here in states that are not Delhi, Punjab, or Bengal, there is a lot of ignorance about what the partition was and its effects. And I'm just glad that you're doing this because I feel like we need young voices to reach out to people, who
I think
to generate an interest.
the one that always surprises me is like Rajasthan and Gujarat that are also border states and that also had massive population migrations from Karachi, from Hyderabad, or whatever it might be. I think those are the ones that, because you're right, there's outside of Delhi, Punjab, Kashmir, West Bengal. Likewise, yeah, I mean, Meghalaya, Shillong, also a border state, also massive migration, but no one really remembers that was it.
But anyway, hopefully things will change soon. So actually, I'm very interested to know, which are some of the stories that have really stood out to you. Maybe you can share a couple of them. Saadia, would you like to speak? I feel like you've been very silent for a while.
Yeah, I think they've been stories that have been personal and personally affected each of us. We all have very different ideas of that one. I think for me, one of the stories that I truly got really emotionally attached to was of this doctor, Dr. Saida Siddiqui, who traveled from Lucknow to Karachi. And I basically loved how this was a very different story of partition, where this family migrated a few years after partition, and they migrated not because their houses were burning or they were being attacked. They migrated because things were just not the same anymore. The medium of education was changing. They just found it very difficult to navigate life and continue in Lucknow. So the whole family basically moved to Karachi to find education opportunities, work opportunities. And Saida was a young training doctor. She was a university student in Lucknow. And she met someone called Sarfaraz while she was at university. And sadly, before they could be married, she had to move to Pakistan, and she had to leave Sarfaraz behind. And turns out a few months later, he also migrated with his family in search of Saida. And one day she finds that Sarfaraz is looking for him while she's working at hospital. And so he proposed to the family again, and they get married, and then they have a beautiful love story where they move to the UK. They have a beautiful family, so I think that one for me was just beautiful, and she had such intense longing to see Lucknow again. And the way she talked about Lucknow, that this is like the only place that she ever thought was home, and it was kind of taken from her. And she still remembers the lions at the zoo, and she could hear them in the evening, and the barks and everything. So I think that was just a beautiful story. And then the experience that Sam and Sparsh were able to create of Lucknow, and this boat ride in the Gomti River, absolutely beautiful. And the truly sad part was that she died before we could show her VR experience. Her experience we were ready to go, but she was just too ill. And so she passed away right before we could do that for her, and kind of we couldn't close that loop of her memory. And her family is still, very grateful to us, but that was a really sad one for us. And that also, like, one of the challenges you asked us earlier is that this generation is dying, and we now really don't have any more time left with them. So we've kind of lost a lot of stories on the way. So I think now was a time that we could think about, we can't access these stories anymore. What else can we do with the archive, with these oral histories, and how can we put it in front of audiences?
The other thing that's worth mentioning with Saida is she was another of these stories. One of the other things that we all loved about it was that she was one of the stories where we managed to find people that she remembered. So there was a mandir opposite her house, and there was a kind of Pandit who lived there. The Pandit's son was her age, and the Pandit's son is now the Pandit of the mandir. And although her house is gone, the mandir opposite is still there, and the Pandit who was living there happened to be the young Pandit boy who she remembered as a kid, who was sitting under the peepal tree with her and playing games in the streets and that kind of thing. So that was a very nice moment of reconnection, I think.
Yeah, we managed, while Saida was still alive, we actually managed to connect them on the phone with each other, and they had a long conversation about Lucknow. I mean, one of the funniest memories I have from that story is normally that we get sent like the interview happens. One of our team members does the interview, and then it's transcribed, and then whoever's out on the field, like because it's kind of hectic, you just get like a list of locations, like go here, here, here. And one of the locations that was on Saida's list was Tunde Kababi, because she remembered the Galoki kebab from Lucknow. And it was like the only time where I've seen a restaurant come up on our location scout list. Yeah, it was a very sweet story.
You'll be happy to know that I was there just a couple of weeks ago, and they are actually now selling them. They're selling the uncooked meat, so it can be sent to Pakistan, and she can recreate. I mean, she's no longer there, but her family can recreate it. So, yes.
Yeah, maybe we
But
should,
yes,
do that.
I
We should send the family some.
Okay, so guys, we have only about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you to wrap up and just tell me what's next on the cards for Dastaan. You've touched a little bit about, on the tour of the films, but what else can we look forward to? Because there's a lot happening.
So, I mean, right now we're all in the UK at the moment. We'll be doing a tour through London, Birmingham, Derby, potentially Bradford and Leeds. After that, we'll be going to either India or Pakistan first. It hasn't been. Sometime it'll be happening in both countries. The order has not been decided yet. But over the next year, there'll be a tour through Delhi and Amritsar, and also through Lahore and Karachi, where we'll be doing screenings, events, talks to commemorate the 75th. And then after that, it's been, yeah. I mean, we've always been like gearing up for the 75th. We thought this is the year where we'll kind of make sure all of it gets revealed, but I don't think we've really talked about what comes after that. So,
but you do have access to the 1947 Partition archive, and it would be lovely to see if you can perhaps do something with their tremendous repository of stories. But what are you most excited about? Perhaps you could tell me that individually from what's coming up.
I'm excited for next week, to be completely honest, as I'm really excited for the launch, and we haven't been together as a team in so long. I'm really, really looking forward to having everyone in one room and for people to finally look at what we've been doing. I mean, some people haven't watched the films yet, so I just think the next Friday at the V&A, if anyone who's watching is in London, please come and say hi.
You're saying it's sold out. That's the problem. But yes, so good luck for that. And I'm going to say thank you for joining us today, and also to the audience for watching us, listening to us so patiently, and also in just such an interesting conversation that unfolded over the last half hour. Now, please join us again tomorrow for another interesting one, because this, as you know, is 75 Days of Partition with the 1947 Partition Archive. And this series is being held to commemorate this momentous occasion of 75 years of partition. The series started on June 3rd and will conclude on August 17th. And so I request you all to keep tuning in. And of course, these videos are also live on the page. Thank you so much, everybody, once again. And I wish you all a good evening, good morning, depending on which part of the world you're in. See you. Bye.